Today, I'm going to be talking about the 10 differences between Canadian and American women. Okay, I'm not sure where you're located in the world, but if you haven't been to Canada, or maybe you're in Canada and you're watching this, but you actually have never been to the United States, or you're in the United States and you haven't been to Canada, or maybe you've only been to both countries a little bit. Well, I moved from Canada to the United States. I've been living here for over 1 year, and that's what I'm going to cover today. That is the differences in Canadian versus American women as a single guy and dating. Okay, if you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Kane. I'm the Silver Bachelor. This channel is 100% dedicated to dating advice for older guys. And if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification button because I'm dropping a video every day. Okay, all right, quick backstory. So I moved to the United States, Atlanta, Georgia, over 1 year ago for my work. I'm a marketing executive for a company. I'm in the HVAC space. And I have lived in Canada, Ottawa, Canada specifically, my entire life. So for those of you that are not aware of where Ottawa is an hour and a half drive to Montreal. That's the French-speaking part of Canada. And about a 5-hour drive it's northeast of Toronto, but it's a 5-hour drive to Toronto, which is in the same province of mine. So in Canada, we call them provinces, not states. So Toronto is closer to the American border. Niagara Falls being probably, there's Messina, there's Niagara Falls. Anyways, the Toronto area is a lot closer to the border, obviously, than than Ottawa. So since I've been in Atlanta, so I'm speaking from experience in terms of in Atlanta, in the South. Maybe it's different in the East, Midwest, West, whatever, in terms of what women are like. But I'm going to go over these 10 differences between Canadian women versus American women in terms of dating them and just in general what they're like. So let's get into this topic. All right, first of all, the United States is basically 10 times the size of population than Canada. The land masses, I believe, are pretty close in terms of but Canada's very spread out. Like most people in Canada just call a spade a spade. Most people in Canada live about 2 hours from the border. So number one is that there's just a lot less women in Canada versus the United States. I mean, major cities have, like Canada's, give or take, I haven't checked the latest statistics, but let's say Canada has like 37 million people. Okay, well, the United States has 340 million people, basically. I might be off by a little bit. I haven't checked the statistics lately. But that's to give you an example. It's basically 10 times the difference. So there's a lot less women in general in terms of the dating pool that you have access to in Canada versus the United States. So with that, kind of as a segue into some of the other things I'm going to go into. So number two, this is an interesting thing. Now, specifically, this is Atlanta. Now, I'm sure with New York, it might be a lot different, but Toronto specifically, there's a lot more diversity of women in Toronto specifically. Obviously, some parts of Canada would be mostly white because they're more rural. But let's just talk about Toronto for a moment, because that's most people in the world. They're familiar with Toronto. They've been to Toronto or they've heard of it, whatever. So if you do visit Toronto, if you've never been, I recommend downtown Toronto. There's a shopping mall called the Eaton Centre. So I recommend going to the Eaton Centre so you will see exactly what I'm talking about in terms of diversity. So Toronto has big populations of Latin women, Middle Eastern women, East Indian women, Asian women, white women, on and on. Like, it is the UN in Toronto. It's absolutely bonkers, which I love. Mixed women, women with like complexion similar to mine. I really, really love that. Atlanta is not so much from a diversity standpoint. Yes, there's a large black population, a large white population, but I'm talking like just an overall like mix of the pie. Toronto is very, very diverse. So that's number two. Number three is, as I mentioned a little earlier, that most of the women, like the largest populations in Canada, are about 2 hours from the border. And the reason is because it's cold as fuck. Like Canada can get as cold, depending on where you are, could be colder, but my home city sometimes would get as cold as minus 35 Celsius and or Fahrenheit. That's cold, right? And that's Ottawa. So it can get colder than that the more north you are in the country. So that's why most people live basically 2 hours from the border, essentially. Okay, so number four is, now this again, this is my experience in also traveling throughout the United States and going to different cities. So I do travel for my work, as well as just comparing it to the women in Canada. I would go so far as to say, now I haven't researched the statistics on this, so, but just in my own experience, the women in Canada are slimmer. Not by a whole lot, maybe 10, 20 pounds, but everyone I think knows that in the United States, there is an obesity epidemic. The women are large in comparison. So I'll throw out some stats and you can research this. The average Hispanic and white woman, average weight is 170 pounds. The average weight of a black woman is 186 pounds. And the BMIs are different as well. So if your BMI is over 30, you're considered obese. So white and Hispanic women on average have a BMI around 25, 26. And the average black woman in the United States has a BMI of 32. So I've noticed this, and I date black women, I date white women, Hispanic women, whatever, Asian women, but I've noticed that just the women in general are larger in the United States in terms of their body weight. So that's a bit of a turnoff for me because I like slimmer women, or at least women that wear their curves very well. And for example, I dated this Brazilian woman one time, and she was 5'7", so she was around my height, and she was 150 pounds, but she wore her weight very well. But even 150 pounds for a woman, that's getting a little heavier, typically. Like, you're not going to be doing lifting them up, carrying them in your arms too easily, okay? So that's number four, is I've noticed that the women in Canada, on average, are slimmer, okay? So number four is the women in Canada are more cautious. So when I say this is that they're not going to come over to your place on the first date typically. They are very big on, hey, we need to meet in a public place for our first couple of dates. That's a norm. And one of the reasons is because in Canada, as you probably know, we don't have the same gun laws as the United States. Not only that, but if I'm correct, I'm positive on this one, that you cannot carry pepper spray. Like, you need a special license or whatever to carry pepper spray. So Canada is very strict on whether you can carry a gun, whether you can carry other kinds of weapons like pepper spray and all that stuff. So it's understandable that the women are more cautious with men. So that's number five. I do have to share a quick story. So in my first few weeks here in Atlanta, I went on a date. Actually, it was 2 dates with this person, second and last. So the second date, she wanted to go to this bougie cocktail lounge in Buckhead. I live in Midtown. So in Buckhead, it's not too far, and Buckhead's kind of a bougie neighborhood with, bougie bars, bougie nightclubs, etc. So she said, well, it would be really cute if I Uber to your place, and then we Uber together to the nightclub or to the cocktail lounge. So I thought, okay, cool. So I thought originally that I booked originally the Uber to pick her up and then stop at my place. I would jump in the Uber and we would go. So I jump in the car and she said, oh shoot, I'm really, really, really sorry, but can you cancel the ride to go to the cocktail bar because I need to leave something at your place? I said, okay, whatever, right? So she comes up to my place, reaches into her purse, boom, puts a gun right on my counter. I'm like, what the fuck? In my mind. So I'm like, I start laughing and she looks at me. She's like, oh, you're not afraid, or this isn't a turnoff for you, is it? And I'm like, no, that's fine. And then I asked her, I'm like, is it loaded? She starts laughing. And she's like, well, of course it's loaded. Why would I have a gun in my purse? I'm like, I'm from Canada. I don't know. So I'm not necessarily against guns because I used to work for an armored truck company where I used to bring money into banks, and I used to carry a shotgun. I had a firearms license. I like to go to the gun range. The coolest gun I ever shot for me was a 50 caliber rifle. My God, like the kill range on that thing is 5 miles, I believe. The fucking bullets are like this, but the bullets are like $5 to $10 each. Anyways, that aside. So number 5, women are more cautious in general than American women. And there's a lot of women, especially in Georgia. So Georgia is a red state. It is a gun state. And there's also, obviously, from what I told you, there's concealed carry, which is fucking crazy. Concealed. And a lot of women are packing heat in their purse. So it's just something you have to get used to. So we don't have that in Canada. 6, I would say that, and I'm just looking at my notes here, that because Canada is a smaller country, right, and there's less population, there's less trauma. So that's been my experience, that the American women that I've met, there's a lot of, it's sad, but there's a lot of broken women because of the trauma they've experienced as a child. So that is a real thing, and it's just something to just be aware of if you're going to be new into the United States, and just the difference between dating Canadian women versus American women. So number 7, women in Canada smoke more weed than the women in the United States. And you might be thinking, what the hell? Because basically every woman here in Atlanta smokes weed, pretty much. And you need to be okay with that because that's a thing. And all ages, they take gummies, they smoke it, whatever. So in Canada, it's just that more. Like, Canada is fully legal with all kinds of weed, everything, all THC, CBD, whatever. Weed is freaking like drinking water in Canada. So that's one thing I've noticed is like the women are pretty much high all the time in Canada versus in Atlanta. All right. So number 8, and this is a big thing, Canada from a political perspective. All right. And I'm not going to, on this channel, I'm not going to get into politics and all that stuff, but I do follow politics pretty closely just for my own knowledge and what all the things going on overseas and the wars and all that stuff. I have a bit of an interest there. So Canada in general is left of center, which means we are more leftist. We are more democratic, to say it like that. If you're an American watching, Canada is more Democratic Party versus Republican Party. So in Canada, there's no limit on political parties. There's basically 4 major parties, maybe 5, depending. So in Canada, just in general, from a political perspective, we are more left of the line in general. So this is number 8, and number 8 is Canadian women are more woke than American women. Okay? Canadian women will embrace things more on the Democratic side, leftist side, in terms of policies, in terms of support for this. Oh, we think it's wonderful that Star Wars is now saying pronouns in their TV shows. Or we think it's wonderful that there's no male heroes anymore and women are kicking ass. In fact, they're also kicking male heroes' ass. Who needs men? That kind of thing. So just be aware, if you're going to be dating a Canadian woman, there's a higher chance that she supports a lot of leftist things. And I'm not saying I'm anti-left, because there's some benefits for sure. But anything too far right, right? Too far on the right, too far on the left is not great. So I kind of teeter between both depending on what the policy is and all that stuff. But in general, women in Canada are more woke than American women. And then 9. Number 9 is, this is a nuts thing. So number 9, Canadian women do not lie as much as American women. Now, that's been my experience. Now, I've also been living in the South for the last year. So maybe it's a Southern thing. I don't know. But the women in Canada just seem to be more upfront about a lot of things. And it has to do with the trauma or the insecurities of American women. I'm not sure. But I find that's just been my experience that I've had more women lie to me in the United States than ever in Canada. In fact, I've been catfished a few times. Not like they weren't real, but rather the women lied about their age. They lied about whether they had children or they had old photos, okay? Number 10, this is interesting, and excuse the siren if you hear the siren, because I live right in like kind of a downtown area of Atlanta, and there's like a major artery street here where like the sirens are coming by like 5 times a day. So anyways, number 10 is this is part of the wokeness, okay? And again, this is my experience, and you let me know in the comments what you think of this, if you agree, disagree. But number 10, and maybe I saved the best for last, is that the women in Canada are not as feminine as the women in the United States. So maybe this has to do with the fact it's so fucking cold and women have to dress for comfort and not for femininity and style because you're going to freeze your ass off in the summer, or excuse me, in the winter. But just in general, I've noticed that Canadian women, and I have a story to share, Canadian women typically will dress more for comfort than for style. You won't see as many women wearing heels. Atlanta, that's a big thing. A lot of women are wearing heels. I love that. I love the nails, lashes I'm okay with, but like I like girly girls, okay, feminine women. I love that. So you just don't see as much as that in Canada nearly at all. Well, not at all, but not nearly as much. Just the same with you see a lot more femininity in South American countries than you do in the United States. So I have a story. My ex-wife, right? She had an aunt that not moved to Canada. She came to Canada on a visa, basically as a nanny to help out with some stuff. Not for me and my ex-wife, but just for other things. Because her sister, so my wife's mother, so that was her sister, was hospitalized, needed a lot of care. So basically that's why she came over. She came over on a nanny visa. So she, at the time, was 64, right? And she was from Colombia. And when I remember when I first saw her, she wore the heels. She was very sexy for 64. Like, she wore the nails and all this stuff. Fast forward 3 years later, she was dressed like a different person. She dressed for comfort. She wore boots. She never wore heels. So that's just an example of how just Canadian women are less feminine, to say it like that, than American women in terms of the way they dress. So listen, man, I hope you like these 10 tips. Well, not 10 tips. These 10 differences between Canadian women versus American women. And let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time.